Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Special Codes. This is our reaction one. It's a part 3 of our first episode, and it kind of sounds weird as I was thinking about it because we've made 3 extra random episodes that connect to a topic that was brought off by comment, which is really cool. I'm excited about that. But I'm Nathan.
And I'm Taylor.
And today we're going to be talking some more about informational input. Taylor's going to lead us off by kind of explaining and setting a good foundation for us to know what we're going to talk about. And then both of us actually had some great ideas. They're more like theoretical scenarios or questions or quandaries that we were wrestling with in this. So we're going to bring those out and hopefully you guys enjoy. Taylor, would you take it away and introduce us to informational input?
Just as a recap, if you're joining us for the first time, in our main episode 1, we discussed how we're sort of already cyborgs. We just have a stopgap where we have to ask Siri or look at our phones to look stuff up, or we have to read information or hear the information. But we're already very, very dependent upon our own technology. We sort of went down a rabbit hole, I would say, talking about informational inputs into our heads. What would happen if machines could have more direct methods into us? And that's been this rabbit trail for the last 2 episodes. And now we're capping it off in something that's a little bit more theoretical, but there are strides being made to go this route. So last time we talked about stimulating parts of the brain, which isn't necessarily an informational download into the brain so much as just activating parts of the brain to produce a result, such as moving your arm or something like that. Today, we want to talk about downloading information directly into your brain, as in, instead of pulling up a piece of information on a phone screen, you can look up some information and that information downloads directly into your head so that you know it. And this is very much more of a theoretical future thing, but there are strides already being made towards this goal. And in some ways, people are already sort of doing this. Not exactly. What we have now is more of the brain stimulation. However, people are finding ways to use that within trainings for like piloting and stuff like that, where they will help stimulate your brain while you're training it to help create pathways and help you learn things faster. So, like I said, that's not direct informational download, but that is a step towards it. So, what we want to talk about today is what are the implications that would occur if we could just have all of this information downloaded into our heads immediately without having to read it, without having to hear it.
One of the things I was thinking as we were talking about informational stuff is I know this kind of sounds dumb. And honestly, because this is so futuristic, a lot of references and a lot of ideas that we talk about will probably have references to movies or to articles or to different things. And we'll do our best to do this. Another caveat here is we're not brain scientists. So there's a lot of errors that we might make, but that shouldn't stop us with the conversation. In this conversation, as you were talking about stimulating stuff for the brain, I remember watching old school Disney movies where they would try to memorize something for a test. And so the way they would do it is they'd put headphones on and fall asleep with the thing repeating over and over and over and over again, storing information saying like, oh, this would hypnotize the person and make them do things that they don't want to do. And so it's interesting that as we're talking about this, the concept of doing this is not necessarily a foreign one for us, but it is a much more complicated process. Like, so for instance, though, Taylor, you were talking about stimulating the brain for flying planes. Can you elaborate on what that means?
Sure. This is all new stuff right now, so I'm sure I'm not the best expert on it. But for instance, they have devices where they've been able to stimulate your brain while you're in training in a simulator where they can help stimulate parts of their brain associated with moving the joystick certain ways and doing certain things that just helps your brain develop those neural pathways to help speed up the process of learning and retaining the information and the motor skills that you need for that.
That's interesting.
It doesn't mean that you just automatically can do it when that happens. You still have to actually go into the training and do the stuff. It just helps stimulate your brain while you're doing it.
Nice. Well, and too, I think that's a really important part to this conversation is that idea of making the process of learning something faster. We're going to address that a little later, but I think that that is part of this. So even though it might be like, well, that's stimulus, you guys kind of talked about that last week. Really, when it comes down to some of this technology that we're going to talk about, when it comes to us as humans and making us better, there is a big connection to the ease and the speed at which we can now learn information.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you're able to download information directly into your brain, imagine what that would do if you're worried about studying for a test or you're in a debate and you don't know the information. If your brain is connected to the internet, you can just download it directly and have that right there. So in some ways, I think as soon as we develop this technology, as soon as we're able to do this, society as a whole will have to change in some way. I just gave you several examples: debates, tests, school. What's going to happen with all of that?
Well, and two, that's the learning side of this. But when you talk about this conversation, again, we're talking about people. And like, even just what you're saying, like what I know of technology is that the download speed of a computer when I was 12 is different from the download speed that we have currently. And so part of this too deals with this idea of if we are to become a society or people who have technology integrated into our biology, right? For the purpose of gaining information or helping us become better. What happens to us when technology is outdated? And in connection to that as well is the idea of at what speed does technology become better? So lifespan, I mean, there's so many issues there too. So as we're talking about this too, going back to your original thought there about how is this going to change our society with schools and education, it also is going to change our society and our understanding of life. But let's start by talking about what you brought up with schools and education and information. How do you perceive pros and cons?
Pros, you're going to have a lot more information probably a lot earlier and be able to learn faster. But I would say maybe a huge con is the lack of human interaction.
Ooh, interesting.
Lack of social build-up, social skills.
Hmm.
I almost worry that I'm an introvert. I don't like talking to people as it is. You give me something like this where I never have to rely on anyone else ever again to learn anything. You might never ever see me again.
Well, my other question when it comes to learning, the process of learning is becoming better in understanding. And I think that as humans, the ability to find error more frequently than like a computer or something like that, there's a beauty in that. We're going to talk about that in future episodes, in the sense that in our errors, we actually find some amazing things. Like penicillin was an error. The whole discovery of penicillin wasn't even something that was planned. And when we find things like this, it's our learning process that helps us find amazing discoveries. But if we remove that element of discovery and it becomes just information that is put into us, are we really learning? Honestly, in my understanding, I don't think we are. And this is part of the reason why I think some of our schools are not very strong in what we do, because what are schools? In a Socratic society where, it's just lectures, you're literally just downloading information, right?
Yep.
You have a teacher and they do it. The learning happens when? How do we use that information?
Most of the things the teacher says is going to get forgotten within a couple minutes.
Right. And so, however, with our minds and our brains, if we have access to information and we will not forget it, if it's stored somewhere in a unknown area or, whatever, I don't know. Like obviously there's a lot of theoretical things that we're talking about here. What does that mean for our ability to learn and ingest this? Because like if that's what we rely on.
I have a fear because now that you're talking about memory, we ourselves wouldn't necessarily have to memorize anything because we could just pull the data. So in some ways, I think maybe this might come to our detriment in reducing our ability and our skills to act independently from technology, because as we know, sometimes technology doesn't work.
Yeah, and I think a dependency upon it would be, but again, there's a lot of things that our bodies depend on. We depend on water, we depend on food, we depend on if you cut those off. This argument, there's a lot of issues that we could even dive into, and I don't think we necessarily want to get on all to these, but just talking about this is a big starting place for us in special codes, especially because we might get down the road and be able to have somebody who does know the brain and to be able to clarify some of these things. Because one of the movies that came to mind as we were talking about this, putting information in, right? The movie Inception came to my mind. So with this, if we implant thoughts or information is implanted into us, how are we going to be able to distinguish the real from the not real? My life versus the life of somebody else. I have images of myself on the beach with some dude. But wait a second. Is that a data error where I accidentally put my face or, cropped it? Like if we have access to all of this stuff, why couldn't we make these things? And then there's a whole bunch of issues of reality versus what's in your brain, and we're dealing with the psyche and psychosis and holy cow. I mean, that rabbit trail, talk about Alice in Wonderland and some crazy funky stuff going on. That's one trippy episode we could get into. Actually, that's a trippy year. That's not,
Yeah.
we could create an entire science fiction book on it.
Yep.
I think there is one. It's called Alice in Wonderland.
And here's a question for you. Where does this information come from?
Is it reliable?
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
As anybody who's spent any time at all on the internet knows, you can't just believe everything you see on the internet.
What? But my TikTok said it's true.
I know, I'm sorry to spoil it, but it's probably not. So the question becomes safety and security and reliability of all of this. Because as soon as you connect yourself into the internet, you have to make sure that connection is secure, because what happens if somebody hijacks your connection? Even assuming we all know there's no way to completely ever stop internet connection or something on the internet from being hacked. There's always going to be a way around it. That's just the fact of life. And then too, even assuming you have a secure connection, how do you know the information is reliable, or how do you know the source hasn't been compromised? Because you could have a whole bunch of people just suddenly set up a bunch of information servers to start indoctrinating people into all sorts of things.
Wait a second. That doesn't happen to mass society ever.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We don't have any sort of media outlet that does that to people.
Oh, I'm sorry. I know this is all news. No one's ever thought of doing anything like that before, and just having this out there will suddenly invite everybody to do it.
Right. But okay, so this also brings us back to our what we have now and what is possible. I think that the idea of information being implanted in us that we take as truths and the security of this, we do have this here today. It just happened to me this week. Okay. I received a text message that said, your Amazon account has been hacked. Please use this link to make sure that your account is secure, from a number in Iowa or some random place. I know what that is. I'm not going to open it. I reported the number and I deleted the message. But for other people who will open emails or do these things and fall prey, not because they're not smart enough, it's just they don't know it. It's not something that they would think about to say, like, oh, this is a scamming thing. And so I think when it comes to like this fear of securities and stuff, I mean, come on. People have been taking advantage of people forever. That's why it's called scamming. It happens all the time to so many people. And we do have safeguards for those kind of things because it's happened so much. But just because that's a potential doesn't mean that we should not necessarily look into it. I just wanted to bring in the reality that even though this futuristic stuff is kind of like crazy, guys, it's happened to you right now. It's not a new thing.
Yeah. The more frightening thing is that the battleground will be directly in your head.
Yeah.
Which I think is, I personally find that more frightening.
Why would that be more frightening than what we're doing now? Because I mean, even now we're still dealing with our head and our thoughts and those kind of things. But kind of expand on that a little bit.
I'll try to do the best I can to explain what I mean. But right now, if my computer gets hacked or whatever, or if I have something with a lot of private information that gets hacked, so that is scary. And somebody can really destroy your life or mess with you and mess you up if they get access to that. And it can be a very serious problem. But that is still an external to you point of attack.
And you as in the human body as you. Yes, so like even though it does harm to you in your world, you yourself in your health and in your life are still okay.
Yes.
Okay. Cool.
But the idea that somebody could hack your brain is frightening to me, because you can take an external, which is bad enough right now, and maybe you could do actual physical harm, or you could mess somebody up, actually mentally mess somebody up. You can already do that now if you do terrible things to people, but this could be any number of things could happen.
Yeah, we could be sitting in the office and I could be sitting here and somebody's trying to take over my mind or, whatever in my work environment, and nobody would be the wiser because it's all an internal process that's happening. They've, in a lot of ways, incapacitated me to reach out for help.
So when I say I think this makes it more frightening, it's because it seems more insidious and potentially even more directly deadly.
Interesting.
That doesn't necessarily mean it will be. All this technology right now is still theoretical. We don't even know if it's going to be even possible to get to this point right now. But the idea of this, I think, because people are trying to get to that point, these are things we do need to talk about now about this, to say, hey, this could be a potential huge problem with this. We should probably think about that and put safeguards in. I'm not necessarily saying we shouldn't do this at all. I'm just saying these are my fears.
I think that goes back to the end of our last conversation, in the sense that we want to be proactive, not reactive. Because I think, especially with technology, if we're reactive, we're behind the A game. Hackers and coders are already looking for the next thing. Scammers nowadays, if we're not proactively thinking about how things are going to happen, then we have to react to certain stuff. There's so many current issues right now that could have been avoided had somebody thought, oh, this might be an issue. I don't want to necessarily bring anything up in particular, but the votes are out about certain stuff. And we're not sure how certain things can turn out if we don't have safeguards in there, right?
Right.
It could have been a moot point had we had the proper procedures in a bunch of things. But because we didn't, we have to be reactionary.
Right.
And you could fill in the blank with whatever I don't have a particular thing in mind there. you probably as a listener know, like, oh yeah, I could have probably done something here and then been less of a reactionary. So we're going to switch it up a bit from talking about society a little bit and the things that are concerning with information and technology, the conversation we've been going on, and build off of this societal idea of access. Because I think one of the concepts that comes to mind when I think about this is access to information. I'm a teacher. One of the biggest things that I see all of the time is, and some people might be like, well, there is equal access for school and education and all of this other stuff. And I'm not going to lie, we as a society do an okay job of making education accessible to all people. It's not perfect. And quite frankly, it is not equal. There are a lot of elements of our education system that aren't equal, depending on your demographics, where you live, the pay that you're able to give to a teacher. Not all schools are created equal, which also means not all education is created equal, right?
Right.
So, access to information, just as we have it today, is a really challenging thing for us as teachers, as people to make sure, like, okay, maybe when you go home, you don't have internet. Right now, I mean, I know this is crazy to think about. And now that COVID's kind of come out, people have started to address this issue. But the school I work for is an online school. And before this, many of our students would have to go to the library. They have to go to a specific location where internet is accessible to them because they don't have it in their homes, which means that for them, access to information, access to education, access to certain things is not available to them compared to some of the other students who have internet in their house. And some of that is not their choice. There's a bunch of issues that go into that. Don't want to get into it. But
You're just pointing out, saying, this is what I see, this is how it is.
exactly. And the reason why is not what I want to talk about. The reality that it exists is what I want to talk about. And when we talk about technology being implanted in our brains, the reliability of that, or all of this stuff where now our information has moved from a computer to our brain. And for those people who are not able to access that information or have access to that technology, there is a disadvantage in that. And I think that's going to change society just a little bit. I mean, it already kind of does. Disadvantages and advantages change society already today. But this
Yes.
technology would really put people above their game, right?
I think every advent of any new technology, there's always going to be, like cars, for example, huge societal change. How people traveled around changed drastically, and people who had them versus people who didn't have them.
Mm-hmm.
Every single technology, you're going to see that. I'm not trying to diminish what you're saying. I'm agreeing with you that there is going to be a certain societal shift, and certain people are going to have this, and they're going to be advantaged in other ways people aren't going to be. That's just the reality of every new technological innovation, and it's factors outside of people's control, and it's not necessarily anything that we can do about it in every single case. I think in some cases we could do better. But I'm not necessarily here to talk about the reasons why people are or aren't, or
Mm-hmm.
how we could fix any of it. I'm just saying there is going to be one with
Mm-hmm.
anything.
Right. Well, and I think like with this one in particular, when it comes to technologies, access to it is a big issue for me as I see kids grow up. And I think the other thing is too, juxtapositioned to access to technology. Okay. Is it okay if I get on a soapbox for just a second, guys? Let's talk about access to technology for just a second. Okay. There's this guy out there. I love listening. Simon Sinek. I don't know if you've ever heard him, but he talks about the effects of cell phones, social media, and I mean it's not just him. There's a bunch of things on this. Social media on our young children, on our kids' development. And access to a certain technology at such a young age has been a detriment to them, right? The release of dopamine, the need to have likes, the need to have all of this stuff through social media is redefining what it means to be, which also has affecting our economy. It's affecting our different things. And so when we talk about this technology, and especially as access, I think it also connects really closely to developmental psychology. At what age is this available? At what age do we let this happen? Because do we just naturally let our bodies integrate this into us and become part of our developmental process? And if that's the case, how does that look? How will that affect? I mean, there's so many questions that concern me with that, because watching kids grow up, this is my life. Watching people grow from birth till they die, the development process is a beautifully challenging thing. But then you integrate into that biology, psychology part of that, a technology aspect that is symbiotic. Is that what we would call that? What would that?
Symbiotic is two things living off the same body, essentially, for mutual benefit.
I don't know what technology gains from us. Anyways,
Technology doesn't gain from us yet.
right. So I'm saying, like, if we do this, maybe it would be more of a symbiotic relationship in that sense. But developmentally speaking, from birth till we die, this has a ton of developmental ramifications, because if we speed up our process of learning, right, that shortens the amount of time we're in school, or it allows us to have the same amount of time with more information. But as we're doing that, what happens when kids learn about certain things before their bodies are ready for certain things? Or are our bodies going to naturally, like, are we going to be able to naturally induce certain phases of life? I'm going into like some crazy stuff here, because developmentally speaking, if you're putting information into the brain, kind of doing some of this stuff here, how do we handle all of this as we're growing into a person, into us? And then does that mean all of a sudden, are we a person now? Oh, oh, I get so confused with that.
The moment we start to make a symbiosis between humanity and machines, it gets crazy. Although, going back to the whole idea of symbiosis means two things living together with one thing within the body for mutual benefit to both the host and the creature inside, effectively. However, I would argue that it would be more parasitic. We would be the parasites, because technology wouldn't necessarily gain anything from us, because technology is not really an entity on its own yet. So we would be the parasites sucking benefit out of technology in a way.
If we move in this technology.
Yes.
So, and I think that the image that I see with technology, and maybe I'm just dumb, but maybe the approach that we need to maybe start talking about the integration of technology into our bodies, and this idea of how can we appropriately do this as humans, is kind of redefine this. Because if I'm thinking about the safeguards, if I'm thinking about the things that I want it to protect me and my body, right? I want to implant something in me that will work in that benefit, right?
Right.
But at the same time, I think that I mean, my cell phone only benefits me. It's not a part of me, but it benefits me. But if this is using my body as like a power base or whatever the case may be, I think approaching it more as a symbiotic relationship would be a healthier option than doing a parasitic one.
Yep.
I never thought about that. That's such an interesting, because then that would mean that technology would almost in some ways have to be an entity in and of itself, right?
That is the implication.
Wow. I mean,
If it's a symbiosis or a parasitic relationship, it implies there's two things, two entities within the relationship.
yeah.
And just to try to clarify what I said, because I'm still trying to think about it myself.
We're getting into new thought right now. You are listening to us going into realms that we have not ever been before.
Yeah. So if we try to develop technology to be a symbiote,
Mm-hmm.
as in this type of stuff that's implanted into us. As a symbiote, that means the technology would have to gain a benefit as well. That's what a symbiosis is both parties benefit in some way, and it's a better thing for both of them.
Hmm.
However, I think that's difficult to understand right now because I don't know how technology could benefit, because it's not really its own independent entity that really wants anything. It just does things. Like, so I don't know. That gets into artificial intelligence, and is artificial consciousness possible? And that's a whole different subject I don't think we're prepared to get into.
Yeah, we would have to do some more research. And I do think that it's really interesting. It is a really interesting concept to think that when it comes to the integration or the implantation of technology into our biology, it is more of a parasitic relationship in which we are the sole benefactors of the technology, correct?
Correct.
That's a really interesting thought because that's kind of a scary redefinition of humanity as we look at technology. And if technology ever were to become an AI and see all of us parasites.
Well, I also think it could go both ways.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we build something that runs off of the human body in order to do things, and if we don't do it right, it could suck the life out of us to power itself.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be a parasite. It would be two parasites eating each other up. Because we would want the sole benefit from it, but it would be taking its ability to do what it can do out of us. We've strayed into a whole new rabbit hole that I don't think we're really prepared or educated enough to talk about. It's just an interesting thought that I think maybe it bears some thinking. I think we need all of you guys out there to maybe think about this concept for a minute.
Yeah.
And in something like this, I do think it would be better to approach it as a symbiosis. But how do you do that with technology? Because as it is right now, aren't we parasites, or is there a danger of technology becoming a parasite?
There's some big thoughts there, man. Which I think when it comes to technology in our current state of being, nobody would ever ask this question, right?
Right.
I don't ever think I've ever thought of myself as a parasite to my phone.
Yeah. It's not really a part of you.
Right. But when you think about the mutual benefit, the phone has no benefit from me, except I plug it in when it's about to die. But that's not mutually beneficial. Anyways, so I think we've talked a lot, and we actually concluded, we landed on a place that even we weren't prepared for, which is exciting. That's kind of what this is about. These are conversations to get us thinking about certain things. And I love the fact that we can do this as humans. We can bring about a conversation that we didn't even expect. Is this an error? No. But if it was a planned and programmed thing, we may not have ever gotten to this place. So, wow. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to have to sit on that thought for a little while of a symbiotic relationship with technology compared to a parasitic one. Man, talk about some Star Trek level stuff, right?
When we came into this conversation, I was thinking we were going to end up talking about the Matrix, because that's effectively what everybody really thinks about with this. But
right,
and I do think maybe that is a possibility for something like this, is we just get lost in our own heads in a different world entirely and lose track of reality. But
right, and in that sense, there is a little bit of a symbiotic, but the technology is more of a parasitic, right?
Yes.
Numbing us for its own benefit in the Matrix, that is.
So I don't know. I think we went to a weird place with this one, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah, it was fun. It's a brain teaser. I think that, I mean, I don't know if the conversation has been out there to think about the approach of integration, because I think that as humans, a symbiotic relationship with one another, not in the sense that we become integrated, but as a society, as people, when we have things that mutually benefit one another, we are able to overcome so many things.
Mm-hmm.
We are able to accomplish so many things together, even if that mutual thing isn't necessarily perceived as equal. It is, because the relationship has defined this as this.
All right.
And that's a human trait that does make our world better
Mm-hmm.
and moves us forward, gets us to be creative, gets us to do this. And I think that if you had a mutual, respectable, symbiotic relationship, you could potentially have some pretty stinking crazy, cool, amazing breakthroughs in creativity. Wow.
Obviously, like the whole idea of symbiosis and parasitic relationships with technology right now doesn't really make sense because technology isn't really an entity. It's just a thing. Like a rock won't care if it's in our arm or not.
Yeah, but I think like if we want to get to a place where we ourselves don't become a rock with integration, because
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's one of the fears that I have, is that I think that there's beauty in the diversity that we have, and if we integrate too much with technology, we become technology and we
Mm-hmm.
lose our humanity. And I think that that is a detriment to our society. However, approaching it with the idea of allowing technology and not being necessarily scared of it to become aware of itself, if that even is possible, even that brings about some pretty crazy cool stuff if we can approach it symbiotically. I think the other fear here too, this is going Star Trek too, is the Borg. I mean, the Borg is a parasitic relationship where technology overcomes biology,
Yes, it is.
right? I mean, and some of you are like, Star Trek, what? Huh? But that is the definition of a parasitic relationship within technology.
So anytime the machine takes over
Mm-hmm.
and controls you, that's parasitic, and the machine is the parasite.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, to think of it this way, we're trying to cause a parasitic relationship just the other way around with technology
Mm-hmm.
because we want to be the ones with the benefit from it. But there's also that risk that the technology then turns on us and becomes the parasite itself. You know, this is all just reiterating what we said before, and I think we could go on and on and on and on about this subject for a long time, but I think for this conversation, we should probably leave it off with sending it up to all of you listening to us. What do you
Yeah.
think about this? Are we full of it? Does this make no sense? Is that idea of whole symbiosis or parasitic relationship with technology, either in the future or now, even makes sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's a big question. And I think it ultimately defines the approach that we're going to take towards technology. Because if we come at it to our own benefit, that's a parasitic relationship. If we come at it saying we want technology to benefit from us and develop ourselves continually to where there's more of a mutual benefit, that redefines how we approach and do this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, yeah, wow.
And again, maybe it doesn't really make sense to even worry about that right now because tech doesn't care. But
But
in the
man,
future, maybe.
yeah. And I think that's the foundation. That's a foundation, is like, what are we hoping for? What are your guys' thoughts? Read in the comments on YouTube. That's kind of where we check the most. Like and subscribe on YouTube, or we love to hear your input. Really helps this conversation. Like this conversation where we just concluded, my brain is tingling with thoughts. That's what I get excited about, is new thoughts that I've never thought about. And this was sparked because somebody left a comment about information going into our brain.
It's been exciting. I think this is probably one of the weirder episodes we've had, but,
Definitely one of the weirder ones.
but
Yeah.
that's okay.
Well, and I think that's what we were saying today, is we're talking theoretical. This isn't the real stuff. Well, hey, thanks for joining us this week, guys. We will see you next time, or I guess you'll hear us next time. Be looking for episode 2 coming out in a couple weeks.
Thanks, everyone.